Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Sarthak Kaul, and this is True Calling. Our guest today is Francesco Cassinerio. He is an experienced supporter of the startup ecosystem with roles in investor relations, startup scouting, and mentoring. His background as an M&A lawyer included advising on million dollar deals that position companies and funds for long-term growth. He played a key role in landmark transitions within Myanmar's banking sector. He initially focused on the startup ecosystem in Southeast Asia, where he collaborated with venture capital funds to identify emerging opportunities at pre-seed and seed stages. He's currently an active mentor guiding entrepreneurs through structured accelerator programs, both US and globally. He also supports startup ecosystems in Southeast Asia and US as an angel investor. So, the reason I wanted to have this conversation with you is because, firstly, you've recently moved to Austin. It's been a few months, right?
Correct.
And you sort of have been able to tap, I think, into the Austin ecosystem pretty quickly. Like, you got in here and you started like working as a mentor for Founder Institute, started talking to startup founders and startups. And I think it has a lot to do with your traveling and like going to different places and settling and then moving and coming back. It's like that you have to develop those skills to quickly get to know the place, I feel like. So I'm just curious to know, like, if we take it all the way back first into how you sort of grew up, right? Like, how was your sort of childhood like? I'm just curious.
Oh, yeah. So thanks for having me here. Grew up in a small town in the north of Italy, let's say 25 miles north of Milan. So I was born and bred there, lived with my parents. And I spent all of my life there until post-university, where I moved to Milan and I started working there. We've been traveling when we were kids with our parents. And my mom has always been like the one that wanted to go like the extra mile and travel a bit more and get some extra experiences. And that's where I got my willingness, to experience different places in the world.
So was that you were traveling within Italy or you?
Oh, across Europe and beyond Europe. So we've been to the US a couple of times with my parents as well, across Europe. And then, yeah, basically that's around it.
Yeah. How did you develop an interest for the Southeast Asian ecosystem?
I've been reading a lot about Southeast Asia. Before Southeast Asia, I'd been reading a lot about China. And when I was studying law in Italy, I've developed this interest into China that then pivoted into Vietnam, which was the first country that basically aligned with China in terms of special economic zones and opening to foreign investment. And I wrote my final dissertation paper about the joint venture contract in China and Vietnam for my JD in Italy. And so the passion basically started there. And then I had the opportunity to move to Southeast Asia a few years later.
And so let's talk a little bit about that. So where did you move first?
Okay, so I left Italy in 2013.
Yeah.
I moved to New York, studied my master in law and at Fordham University in New York. And then I worked there for almost a year for a boutique law firm dealing with inbound and outbound investment from and to Italy. And then from there, I was like, that's my good time to move to Southeast Asia. I had the opportunity to talk to acquaintances and friends who were already there doing advising jobs for different companies.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother as well, who's been in Southeast Asia for longer than me. And then
what does he do?
He works for an NGO in Cambodia. So he runs Cambodian and Lao programs for an NGO. And so talking to these people, I was like, they were like, look, Southeast Asia, they gave me like an idea. Then I read into the World Bank, white papers and Asian Development Bank white papers. And talking about like, look, if you want to go somewhere that is really new and needs a lot of foreign help, it's Myanmar.
Mm.
And so back in February 2015, I moved to Myanmar.
And at that time, how was the ecosystem in Myanmar? Like, what was happening in, not just startup-wise, just like as a place, what is Myanmar like?
So it was very unknown, to be honest.
Yeah.
Myanmar opened up to foreign investments in November 2013 with the first foreign investment law. after over 40 years of isolation. And so the first international player moved in early 2014, mid 2014. Being there in 2015 was very early days. There was no proper internet connection outside of Wi-Fi areas that were very, very limited. Not a lot of people were speaking English. And so it was basically a complete new environment. Very, very untouched. But even though people did not speak English, they were always very friendly. I've always felt very, very safe. And they were literally trying to help and go the extra mile and try to communicate with you. And so it was very, very challenging, but very, very nice. And I've learned a lot. And so from a work perspective, there were lots of first of their kind sort of transactions because there were no foreign players before 2014, let's say, in the country. Lots of potential, lots of international companies, both from across Asia and Europe, looking into Myanmar for partnerships and also for bringing their own products there, potential acquisitions.
Do you remember what kind of products were being brought in?
There were lots of infrastructure discussions, so there was a lack of infrastructure, so like a renewal of refurbishment of the Yangon airport. They started on some highways, deep sea ports. In terms of product, Myanmar economy was mostly agricultural. So there were lots of, let's say, agricultural related companies that were trying to bring in their products all the way from tractors to, pesticide and across those type of products. Also, lots of companies trying to set up shop there, from automobiles all the way to hotel chains that try to establish themselves in Myanmar. Because Myanmar is a huge potential, and it's also as big as Germany and Italy combined in terms of landmass, and you have lots of untouched seasides, ancient spots where there are lots of history, and there was nothing, and so all these hotel and leisure. And then from mining perspective as well, Myanmar is rich in natural resources. So there were mining companies looking into potential opportunities, oil and gas as well. Myanmar has both onshore and offshore oil and gas. So from the exploration phase and studies, lots of international oil and gas companies try to move into Myanmar.
Interesting. So, like when you think of Myanmar now, do you ever have any, like, what are opportunities you see in that part of the world right now?
So the opportunities now, I'd say, are pretty limited due to the military coup that took place in February 2021. And so lots of foreign companies left the country, and they wrote off their investments, and they decided to leave the country. And also lots of my friends that were still there, like international friends, they left. At the moment, there's not, let's say, much going on. Also, it's a matter of reporting, having investments in Myanmar due to the political scene at the moment would be very tough for international companies because they have to, come back to their shareholders and explain why they still have investments there.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, again, lots of companies left, and the Myanmar people that are there are trying, to get along with the new sort of scene there.
Like at some point, I remember like a few years ago, I read like that Myanmar is one of the happiest countries in the world. Do you know anything about, like, now that you've like been in different countries, stayed in Singapore for a while too, now in the US as well, like, is there anything that kind of alludes to that fact?
They're very friendly. Again, since I moved there, not that many people used to speak English. Back then, everybody was trying to help each other and trying to help, foreigners that they just arrived there. They appreciate life and whatever life gives them. I think it's also a matter of culture and religion as well. And so you could see people really happy kids playing in the streets, and happy people around.
Yeah. So tell me, like, what happened after that? Where'd you go from there?
So from there, I left end of 2019 and I moved to Singapore. I had a job opportunity in Singapore and I decided to take it. And so early 2020, then I moved to Singapore from there.
I mean, Singapore is a hub for all the foreign direct investments that are happening?
Singapore, yes. Singapore is this Southeast Asia getaway. It's a getaway to Southeast Asia for foreign investors, foreign investments, and a lot of companies. They set up their headquarters in Singapore. Is the most developed countries in Southeast Asia and the most, let's say, investor-friendly from an international perspective. I moved there for a job opportunity with Chevron, the oil and gas company. They needed specific lawyer back then. I was still an M&A lawyer for a transaction, and so I worked with them for a year on that transaction.
I'm very curious about this, the M&A side, because I don't think many people like understand what happens in that process when a company is either merging or getting acquired. From a lawyer's perspective, like, can you, I guess, shine a little bit of light on what that process even looks like and what people might not even think about?
So it's a lot of paperwork, as you can imagine. It all starts with preliminary talks, and then you basically have few documents that you go through, like non-disclosure agreement, letter of intent, then term sheet, and then you start negotiate the share purchase agreement, which is the final binding document that basically, when it's signed, then the company gets acquired. These are processes that may take a lot of months and potentially years, depending on the complexity of the transaction. A lot of that is also a matter of the sector the company belongs to. There's a lot of in-depth due diligence that has been done from a legal perspective, not only legal, but also financial and commercial due diligence, but legal, particularly in all the aspects of the company. It's a long process that everybody wants to finalize very quickly. So you have to work long hours.
Were you a lawyer on the acquirer side?
I've done both. So when the beginning of my career, when I worked in Italy, I did work for private equity funds as client. So I've done buy side, I've done sell side, and I advise companies. The last transaction with Chevron was on the buy side. And so you have different angles that you want to tackle and different priorities, let's say, depending which side you advise. Also because you have either like a divestment. And so basically you just want to limit all the liabilities on the company or the asset that you're selling. Or on the other hand, you want to have lots of, certainty about, what happens in case something goes wrong.
Yeah.
And these, let's say, like very high, these are the most important, let's say, things to look into.
When it comes to mergers and acquisitions, like, is there any advice you can give to startups, for example, on how to ensure like the path to acquirability or acquisition?
Don't think about M&A too early. Don't lose focus on what you're building, your product, your solution, and scale. If there's a secondary, which is basically an acquisition by an already existing player that will take place, you will need to reach a specific stage based on the industry and the vertical you're in. Before then, you're absolutely out of the radar. So don't consider an exit too early and focus on building great company, a great product, a solution, and then potentially look into acquisition if that's the way you want to go through. You don't want to go to an IPA, or potentially look for your startup to acquire similar solutions in adjacent sectors or verticals to grow your own company and make it like a very important player.
Yeah, make it more valuable. So I wanna ask you a little bit more on the Southeast Asia side about what insights you've had about the Southeast Asian economy since you have been working there. What are some trends that you've kind of seen across these countries? And I know you focused more on, as you said, like Myanmar, Singapore, maybe even Indonesia. We talked about a little bit of that side of things. And India has its own thing.
So Southeast Asia started emerging when China moved from labor-intensive sort of manufacturing to a more high-end manufacturing hub. And Southeast Asia starting basically replacing China on that sort of the labor-intensive manufacturing. Now you see a shift, depending on the country, you see a shift into more high-level sort of solution and manufacturing. I'll give you a couple of examples. Indonesia is very rich in nickel. So Indonesia is very rich in natural resources. And so people keep seeing Indonesia more and more as an EV battery producer and manufacturer. So shifting towards the EV sector. If you consider Thailand, for instance, has always been a hub for manufacturing of also like medicines. Now now they're also producing their own medicine, not just generic ones. Malaysia, for instance, is getting more and more important in the semiconductor business. And so you see companies like Intel moving there, but they're also setting up their R&D centers. Vietnam as well. You see, Apple, Samsung setting up their manufacturing facilities and also R&D centers. So the point is, population is getting more and more educated, and you see a better quality of local universities than it was, let's say, 20, 30 years ago. But you also see people that have moved out of these countries and they worked abroad in countries such as the US or the UK, and then they decide to move back. So when they move back, they bring their own expertise, and that gives a lot of credibility to then companies that hire them, or them starting their own companies, and they have big credibility. And that's like a big trend. You have to remember that Southeast Asia is roughly 700 million people, which is almost like double the size of the US.
Yeah.
The median age is very young. It's around 30 years old. We're talking about Europe, when I'm European, I think it's 40 something, and the US is, and there's a huge penetration of internet services. And these are generations that have skipped the PC sort of phase of internet. They went through digital and mobile straight from zero, basically. And so there are lots of solutions as well that have been developed in Southeast Asia for e-wallet, mobile payments as well. And these are trends that you can see that affect the entire economies of all these countries. So from banks looking into digitalizing their products, digitalizing their KYC, trying to reach more people in second tiers or maybe in rural areas. And so you see these key trends that have been developing for the past 5 to 10 years, I'd say.
Like India has completely skipped I was there right now, and every time I go back, I notice this, but this time was much more shocking because I had bought this phone for my friend from the US. He was like, iPhone waiting time's really long. In India, can you get a phone from here? And he gave me half in USD. The cash he gave me back was half in USD and half in rupees in cash. At one point, I remember I had bought some stuff. That was a wedding I went for, and when I was asking for like a shopkeeper, because I didn't have change or something, I was asking for change, and he's like, I mean, I can UPI you the money and like just send it through the phone. And I was like, wow, like this is like a thing that if I go to any store here, I would probably be able to get a cash in the US. It would be able to get cash in the US, but in India, it seemed to be like cash is just out of the picture. I feel like that's a very interesting, like the Indian economy just skipped a lot of that cash. It's become mostly cashless. And I think that's like the similar thing that's also happening in the rest of the Southeast Asian countries. Would you say?
Yeah, correct. And at different level, of course, because there's different level of development in different countries. And that's what happened in China as well. And so that's a big trend, especially, again, young population. It's a big. It's way bigger than in Europe, for instance. In Italy, it's not that widespread.
Really,
being cashless. The population in Italy is very old, so they're used to paying cash, and for them, like using like a card or a e-wallet solution is difficult because they need to interface, to download an app and go through, use their phones, and so it's difficult. And you can see that this there's difference a lot between, let's say, Southeast Asia, across Southeast Asia, and let's say Italy as well.
So, the sectors you mentioned that Southeast Asia sort of kind of taking over are like, manufacturing, semiconductors, like these are like capital intensive businesses. So I know that you angel invest as well. I'm guessing you're not angel investing in such heavy businesses. So what are you kind of looking into as an angel investor in Southeast Asia?
So my investment thesis is very, very easy. It's I invest in what I understand, and I invest along with my wife. And so if either of us understands the solution, then we decide to pull the trigger potentially. So we invested in fintech solutions, as we mentioned earlier, like the digitalization of the region, the access to potential lending solutions for customers that didn't have the opportunity. So we invested in that sort of space. We invested in solutions that are tailored to small and medium businesses as well. And Southeast Asia, I'd say 70% maybe of the businesses are considered small and medium businesses.
What are some, could you talk a little bit about the solutions for SMBs? And I know your wife is also in the SMB space for TikTok, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So we invested in a solution that basically it's like online ledgers for SMBs and some sort of very simple inventory solutions so that you can keep your records correctly instead of writing down pen and paper that they used to be. And I think that this was very interesting for me to invest in, also in the perspective of these SMB potentially get access to lending from banks. So once you have your book well kept together and you can have some proof of your business and your balance sheet to a bank, then there's easier access to capital. And so I think that there's still a lot of. I used to work in a bank in Myanmar my last year as a legal counsel, and I see that there was this huge gap to bridge of access to capital. And when we think about SMB access to capital, in the US, you may think about, 50,000 euro, 100,000 euro and above. In Southeast Asia, the threshold is much lower. So it can be a few thousand euros, US dollars, all the way to maybe $10,000, $15,000. SMBs is, as I said, is very widespread. It can be anything from, a small shop that wants to expand, maybe in tier 2 city or in the more rural areas. You can talk about agriculture, fisheries as well, that they may need access to capital to improve their businesses and grow. And so I think that there's a huge potential for those solutions still. There has been a lot of companies and startups addressing those needs. And so it's pretty mature market there. There's also a trend in sustainability, at least. So Southeast Asia potentially will be impacted by climate change quite drastically. And so there's a need for sustainable solutions. They started all the way from software that account for greenhouse gas emissions, all the way to more tangible solutions for sectors such as agriculture, for this type of sector, for fishermen as well. And there's a huge need of, improving conditions of agriculture and try to utilize less resources to improve sustainability in general. These I see the trends that you can see, I guess.
Yeah, there's a lot of ideas in there, what you just said right now. By the way, how do you come across these companies?
So we are members of a couple of angel investment networks, and also through personal contacts and connections, we have access to different deal flows. I also scouted some startups for a VC. And so I've made my own connections. And so these are the ways that we basically get access to deal flow in Southeast Asia.
So one thing you're looking at is, as an investor, is if you understand the problem, are there other things you're looking at in terms of the founder?
Yeah, so we mostly invest in pre-seed, seed. So based on different stage of the company, we're looking into different key areas. Funding team, if the founder is a serial entrepreneur, of course, it's a very potentially better opportunity. There's so-called founder market fit. So if the founder has suffered firsthand the pain point that he's trying to solve, and then I personally look into the size of the market. So market sizing, you need to have a very, very big market to have the potential of being interesting for me. And then these basically are two key areas. And the team, if the founder has a team, there's a co-founder, how the two interact, which are the skills that they have these days is pretty important, let's say, to have a technical co-founder.
Yeah.
Most of the solutions are, apps or software. And so that would also cut a lot of time in terms of developing their solution instead of sourcing outside somebody that will have to be onboarded and maybe working on a fractional basis to lower cost. And so that would, let's say, that would prolong the development of the solution and that a decent valuation, I'd say. and
Of
then
course.
it's always important in terms of usually safe notes. We invest through safe notes. Safe notes is very widespread in Southeast Asia as well these days.
Okay. So, there's one question I have about angel networks. I think on offshore, at least what I've seen, because the last two startups that I've worked on have been offshore teams, is, well, A is like they don't feel as invested in your company because they just don't have, they're literally offshore. They're not part of the core team. And so it feels much more like a job than like as part of the mission. So something that we did differently in this startup was to actually give them some equity, some upside in our company, so that they actually also stay on and also feel that they're contributing to something bigger. But then again, I think it's a very hard balance to strike because these agencies and offshore like engineering teams they're working on multiple different projects. So that's like I think the downside of having an offshore team versus having like an in-house team for anything like design, marketing, engineering, whatever that might be. So question on angel networks, because you have this Southeast Asian angel network that you work with, but then you also are part of CTAN, which is here in Austin. So what are some differences that you see, and I haven't really seen this talked about, is like the differences within angel networks on how they go about the deal sourcing process, but also like the closure process. Could you give some light on that?
So here is more structured. As you said, I'm a member of CTAN. CTAN has been actively investing for almost 20 years now. So they develop their internal processes and they structure them because of the expertise and the years of experience that they have. Southeast Asia Angel Investing, the network that we are members of, they're like not 20 years. They've been established for 20 years. That's one of the most important
The experience
differences that we find. I think it's also a matter of sectors. Like for instance, like biotech in the US. US is at the forefront from this sector. You don't see that many biotech deals in Southeast Asia. It's not there yet. Or here.
Why do you think? Is it a maturity thing?
I think like access to capital, talent. But it's because there's a lot of talent like when you're in biotech that you want to remain close to the biggest global hubs that you can find in the US. And it's also a matter of the amount of R&D happening in the US because of how the system is set up. So if you consider like healthcare here, it's all private. And so it's considered basically like another vertical of a different business. And, lots of big international biotech companies are headquartered here. And so they also pour money into the sector and they grow these hubs across the US. There are not these players in Southeast Asia, and I'd say that there are some in Europe, but most of them, I would say, there are here. And so I think that the reasons why biotech is not that developed in Southeast Asia is more developed here. Also like generative AI, you need a very specific talent, and it's most across the US that you can find this talent. So all the solutions that you can come across related to generative AI are here more than, let's say, in Southeast Asia. And I'd say the number of deals we came across here being part of this angel investment network is much higher. And more variety of the solutions in terms of the vertical they're tapping into. And again, it's more structured. There are more events that you can be part of. And you see that this has been a very well-oiled machine because of the number of years they've been in business.
What do you see is like something that you could do or copy paste from the US angel network system? At least it seems like there's a higher propensity of deals that are coming to you here, surely because probably volume, like there's more people building companies probably, but also like there's a process into that. I know that in India, like the angel networks, they're trying to figure this out. Like there's more and more of these coming out as well. But what would you sort of kind of pass on?
I'd say, it's potentially the internal structure, but I understand that the internal structure is also a consequence of people in the network, so the angel investors, and how long have these angel investors been angel investing. So I think it's something that will come with time more than anything. And so like that's what I think it is. I would pass that, like the internal processes that we have here that's something that I would consider. But again, it's It's also a matter of how long these members have been investing in, and maybe in Southeast Asia people are looking into angel investing, but they haven't done it yet, and so you can pass the same process. It will be great and a good solution when time will be right.
Yeah.
Maybe in a few years.
Yeah.
At the moment, it's very difficult. It's also a matter of, trying to source deal is different. Here you source mostly from the US, so you don't have even language barriers. Sometimes in Southeast Asia, you may face language barriers as well because you have an Indonesian deal, Filipino deal, everybody speaks English. You can have these sort of nuances. You can also have, it's more, let's say here, it's a one market. I know that, there are different ecosystems within the US, but it's basically one market. Southeast Asia are different markets. And so you need to have maybe there some experts in specific countries, so country experts, to better analyze a solution. Here, it's only the US, so you don't have a country expert, but here you may need more of like a sector expert, especially when it comes to, again, sectors like biotech, when they're very, very technical. And so, for instance, I don't have the knowledge to go through the technical side of those deals.
So can you share any at all about what has been a successful investment for you?
So, sure. I think so far there's a couple that are trending pretty well. Again, there's a white label platform for KYC and onboarding unbanked people across Southeast Asia due to the distance that they have from bank branches, and they're doing very well. It's a very good team. Laser focus, lots of proven experience in the sectors across Southeast Asia. Very good contacts. They managed to scale starting from zero very quickly, onboarding new banks and expanding throughout Southeast Asia. I find this as a good investment. So far, good traction and hopefully good returns.
One of the things that I started this podcast for was to see how I could, through these conversations, bridge the US and Southeast Asia ecosystem. You're a living example of like doing that. But what are ways that you see this ecosystem can be bridged?
It's more like the US is so ripe for innovation, and the startup ecosystem is so big and gives access to so many good deals. Then I don't see the appetite potentially for investors to look beyond. It's also a matter of Southeast Asia. There's some, country risks as well to be taken into consideration that they don't affect absolutely the US. And deal flow. It's the other issue that you may be a prominent player in the US, but don't have access to good deal flow in Southeast Asia. It's more vice versa that can happen because there are lots of big investors, internationally recognized, that are American more than Southeast Asian. And so I think that from an investor's perspective, there should be more, maybe potentially interest, but access to deal flow to bridge the gap. And even people in Southeast Asia are looking into the US, but they don't have, some people on the ground potentially, and, willingness to invest with little to no knowledge of the market. That's one thing from, let's say, an angel investment perspective. From an institutional investor perspective, you see lots of venture capital American funds that they set up in Southeast Asia, and they did invest in Southeast Asia very successfully. I think that it's going to be difficult the other way around. And it's a matter of deal flow, and it's a matter of access to good companies. Like if you consider the Bay Area, which is, the best ecosystem across the globe, then if you are a founder raising in the Bay Area, you will be looking to,
the people
big
right
names
around
in the Bay Area, right? A16Z, all so these type of guys. Or if you go to a lower level in terms of stage of the company, you looking to Y Combinator. So it's difficult to play a very prominent role for non-American investors in the US.
Yeah. We had as part of our class, we had Josh Bearcom from Capital Factory. He's the founder of Capital Factory, and we asked this question about what is Austin's role to play in the US ecosystem. So, do you have any thoughts on like where Austin lies in this?
Austin is, again, I've been here 4 months. I'm,
You have the new fresh eyes to see this problem. I think
it's a growing ecosystem. Clearly, has been growing exponentially in the past decade or so.
Mm-hmm.
There are some key areas where Austin is already considered at the forefront across the US. Dual use when it comes to capital factory, dual use solutions, military and civilian. It's very big, like the DoD related solutions there. There's also a very good CPG scene in town. There's Whole Foods as well, and Yeti. These are the most known companies. And there's like very good accelerator that is CPG related in town that is trying to grow the scene and has been successfully doing so.
Is Q?
SQ. B2B SaaS solutions, that's what Austin is pretty well known for.
Mm.
I mean, these three are the key trends in town, I'd say. I think that the maturity of the ecosystem will mature, but it's a matter of time.
Mm.
It's a matter of time, and it's a matter of attracting talent from outside of town. Austin has UT, and UT is great pool of talent, but it would be maybe worth attracting talent from outside, talent that has maybe already developed a couple of solutions that they had maybe could exit, and so they're successful entrepreneurs.
Mm.
And to grow the ecosystem, let's say from the bottom up, there's capital. I think Austin is the number 8 seat in the US for deployment of capital.
Yeah.
Which is pretty good if you consider how it improved in the last decade. I mean, there's lots of people moving into Texas more generally these days. And I think that this will help because these will be people with different backgrounds, even people from big tech. Usually people from big tech that they leave their jobs, corporate jobs, and they decide to set up their own startups and launch their own startups. And so the influx of big tech into town, for sure, it will help. You see Elon Musk setting up more and more, lots of different companies across town and you say greater Austin area. There's capital from a VC perspective as well in town that is ready to be deployed in Texas for Texas solutions. And so I find this very interesting, like the Texas focus. There are good accelerators in town as well.
You work with one. Let's talk about that, like Founder Institute. Not an accelerator per se, but would you consider that an accelerator?
Yeah, it's an incubator / accelerator. 2 cohorts a year. They can basically bring you all the way from idea to potentially like an MVP.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a good opportunity for the ecosystem. Capital Factory is an ecosystem itself, and then they help entrepreneurs that are residents there to develop their own solutions. There's Antler in town that came from Singapore. So it's headquartered in Singapore. They have very, very good reputation there. There are different accelerators. There's Q Branch as well that has more of an international angle. So there's a vibrant ecosystem. It's a matter of time. I mean, if you look at the Bay Area, the Bay Area as we know it, have been knowing for the last decade, hasn't started the way it is now. So it's also a matter of time. I think that Austin has everything to succeed as long as successful people in the startup ecosystem will remain here.
Yeah. To kind of nurture that ecosystem. Yeah. Last question on the founders you've come across so far. You're mentoring at Founders Institute. So what are some common problems you come across? Common questions founders ask you, and what do you tell them?
Sure. So they're very, very early. So again, from idea, so most of them need some sort of market validation. So some product market fit. So product market fit is a very important part of, trying to develop a solution. So they ask me how to get to product market fit, what they should do. They come up with solutions on how to validate their ideas and potentially iterate. It's always important to find some core customers where you can, test your solution, ask them questions, as many as you can, figure out if your solution addresses their pain points or not, and how you can improve the solution before trying, to go to the broader market. Potentially how to raise money. It's always like, I always say that whatever money you raise, the dollar that you raise needs to have more than just the face value of the dollar, meaning I call it smart capital, meaning you want to raise money from people, if it's angel or institutional investor, that they can help you in terms of they have expertise, they have connections, or from VC perspective, you have companies in their portfolio with which to create some synergies. And so that's what and focus on venture capital funds or angel investors potentially with expertise in the sector that you're building your solution. That's another important aspect, I'd say. And then go to market, which comes after product validation. It's always like a big area to tap into, from pricing all the way to type of marketing, depending if it's a B2B solution or a D2C sort of solution. You have, different angles and different issues that they face.
Yeah. Last question on this. Of course, VC funding is very selective at this point for a lot of the startups, and it's sort of, people are waiting to deploy capital, although there are, of course, funds that are deploying capital too. So I know a couple of founders that have sort of tried to go the angel investing route to get some capital in. How do they find you? How do they find these people?
So I find it interesting here in the US. I receive a lot of messages on LinkedIn, like cold outreach on LinkedIn, which is definitely not that widespread of a solution in Southeast Asia.
Why is that?
To be honest, I haven't figured it out yet. They're like, it's like another way of tapping into potential like angels. It's LinkedIn here. I've talked to other people and they said it's very common here that as an angel investor, if there's some sort of, link in your profile to the fact that you are one, then people reach out to you pretty frequently. I think in Southeast Asia, I haven't had that, or at least as frequently as here. How they find angel investors in general. I mean, there are networks, Titan, the one I'm a member of. There are other networks, I think that, and it's also like you do your own homework, you figure out as a founder who you're interested in, and figuring out that person, if he or she is a member of an angel investment network, or how to get to that person through common connections, people that can introduce. So it's always better to have a warm introduction than like a cold outreach, because you have sort of a validation when you get a warm introduction by somebody that is a connection in common.
Yeah, building trust.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, dude, thank you so much for joining. I know you have to run as well, but I appreciate you joining. Let me know how I can help in any way, in this whole process, since you're very early in Austin.
Okay. Thanks a lot for inviting. It was very good.
Yeah.
And I hope to see you soon.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.